So everyone's heard about the recent indictments and convictions of the Proud Boys members, specifically the sentences that were handed down onto uh, Dominic Pizzola, Ethan Nordine, Joseph Briggs, Zachary Rail, and Enrique Tarrio. And when these reports initially came out, the first that I heard about Dominic Pizzola, who got 10 years for entering into the Capitol building on January 6th, there were reports of him in the courthouse sobbing for mercy from the court. In the other cases, in the case with Enrique Tarrio, the Afro-Cuban who is the chairman of the Proud Boys, who received 22 years for his role in what they call seditious conspiracy and a plot to overthrow the election results. He asked the judge to show him mercy. So we see, a pattern of these quote unquote patriotic white and Afro-Cuban militiamen asking the court for mercy when the sentences came down upon them. And I thought to myself, it's interesting because I always hear a lot of people talk about what Black people don't do and talk about what Black people should do as an oppressed people in fighting for our liberation. And when I think back to, for example, Chairman Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party and Mark Clark, two brothers who did not have the privilege of receiving a trial, who were executed without any due process. And as we heard the chairman, the great ancestor Fred Hampton, say in many of his speeches, you can jail me, you can kill me, but that's not going to kill or jail the revolution. So his response and his outlook on being a freedom fighter and fighting for liberation is totally different than these guys. These guys are responding somewhat cowardly in a sense where it seems as if they didn't realize what they were actually getting themselves into, being that they weren't prepared to go all the way. And when they did receive these sentences, most of them were very sad and remorseful that they actually had to spend time in prison. And this is not even getting into all of the other political prisoners that have been arrested, Black political prisoners that have been arrested by the United States government and who served sometimes even up to 50 years and 60 years of prison time. So we look at it from the perspective of, or at least I do, that we have all of these Black men and Black women who have served this time who have not shown any type of cowardice in begging for mercy. They've accepted the crimes or the penalties, and in many cases they fought against the penalties, but they haven't begged and shown weakness as I've seen in many of these Proud Boys members. What were your thoughts when you saw these sentences come down? Because I know you lived through that era, you being a former member of the Black Panther Party, and you knew a lot of those brothers who had been in some cases wrongfully convicted of crimes and sentenced to sentences that they were not even guilty of, but they still didn't beg the court for mercy. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, I thought about a lot of our current prisoners, people like Imam Jamil El-Amin and Mumia Abu Jamal, Ed Poindexter. Ed Poindexter, for example, I think may have the record now, at least among the Panthers. Ed was convicted in 1970, and he's still in prison for his political activities in Omaha, Nebraska. And I think the major difference, in my opinion, is that our brothers and sisters who are, have been political prisoners. We can't forget all of the sisters that were part of MOVE, who have, finally been released, political prisoners. They took the position. I'll read you what JoJo Bowen said. I ain't no angel. I'll do my time. All we want is to be recognized as what we are, human beings. And he was captured in 1973. Still in prison. Spent 27 years in solitary confinement. Revolutionary brother Russell Maroon Schultz, who was released, after he was contracted a terminal illness. He said, "I'm a political prisoner of war. The war of national liberation that has been going on since Africans were kidnapped, brought to the Americas, and enslaved. Under international law, oppressed people have that right, the right to be free from oppression, and to build a nation that will protect their freedom and independence. That's what we were doing. That's why I'm a political prisoner of war." Let me see. Jamil El-Amin has a quote here. Let me get it for you right quick. "Blessed are those who struggle. Oppression is worse than the grave. It is better to die for a noble cause than to live and die a slave." So I think the difference between these brothers and sisters and others, including some that have been recently incarcerated, like, Reverend Joy Powell of Rochester, New York, they're in a struggle for the liberation and empowerment of African people. They weren't following a madman, right, who they found out was a person who they can't rely on to uphold his end of the bargain. All of these brothers and sisters were fighting for a cause. And I think that's the major difference. I think that's why you see such strength and determination on their parts. Even though, as you said, Chip Fitzgerald joined the Panther Party when he was 17, was stopped riding in a car in Los Angeles for a broken tail light. It's amazing. I remember we had a caravan on Statesville Avenue, and this might have been I think this was in 1969. One of the brothers had one tail light out, and the police pulled him over, and of course all of us pulled over at the same time because we weren't going to abandon the brother. But those kinds of things, they start harassing. Next thing you know, these brothers, all of us, we're going to stand up for ourselves. We're not going to allow these people to punk us. And an incident occurred, and Chip wound up dying in prison. He went to prison when he was 19. He wound up dying in prison in 2021. So I think that's the difference. I think these guys have come to the realization, even though they were out espousing, they were essentially a street gang, out attacking, people at various demonstrations against police brutality and things like that. And even though people like Biggs, for example, served in Iraq, when the reality hit them that they were actually going to prison, then they broke down. They broke down and started crying, like a bunch, like some children, who have been, denied the ability to go outside and play. And I think part of it is because they realized that they got suckered. They got suckered by a con artist who really, doesn't give a crap about them. But the fact of the matter is, as opposed to our brothers and sisters who, in the case of, like, say, Jamil El-Amin, convicted of a crime which another man confessed to. Otis Jackson confessed to the crime that Jamil El-Amin has been convicted of and is serving life without parole. These guys have the possibility of being released. If Donald Trump is elected, he it he will. Well, only one of them I think has a federal. Well, no, I think all of them have federal sentences, right? Yeah, so he can commute their sentences because they're federal sentences. The other thing is that when you look, for example, at a case, like the Pendleton 2, let's see, where do I have that? I got it somewhere. The Pendleton 2, uh, the brothers John Balagoon Cole and Christopher Naheem Trotter, who were in the Indiana State Reformatory, would have been released in a few years. There were a group of prison guards that were called the Sons of Light. They were a white supremacist KKK splinter group, but they were serving as guards in this correctional facility or reformatory in Indiana. They started beating up one of the prisoners, and Brother Cole and Brother Trotter came to the defense of the brother, saved his life because they were beating the man to death. They saved his life. In order to do that, they had to take over that wing of the prison, and they were sentenced. Check this now. They were sentenced for saving a man's life to 84 years and 142 years. Now, the judge in the case of Terrio and Biggs and the others actually gave them less time than the U.S. government was asking for. I think they wanted, maybe 33 years for Terrio and 32 years for Biggs. These guys were convicted of seditious conspiracy, and there was supposed to be a terrorism enhancement as part of the conviction. And they barely got, in some cases, a little more than half of what the government was asking for. So it's just a total different ball game. And I'll close with this almost and let you continue. We don't even have to imagine if this had been a march on the U.S. Capitol by people of African descent, there would have been enormous carnage on the grounds of the Capitol. And those who survived the carnage and were arrested would all be serving, beyond a shadow of a doubt, life without the possibility of parole, and who knows whatever else they could be charged with. But basically, they would never get out of prison. And those are just some things to think about in terms of the way this particular thing has come down. There are at least two Trump-appointed judges on the D.C. court, and both of them have been lenient in terms of what the government asked for. And even though there are people who say that the government, even what they've been sentenced to is far too much, for what they did. Go ahead, brother.
To your point, I mean, we see the proof in that just in the sentencing in this case, because the one person who does have some African descent got the most time, even though he was the person that wasn't even present on the day that it happened. So he got more time than the guys who were there and who also acted with him in planning it out. He got more time than all of them. So your point is right and exact. If this were a black group that was planning this type of attack on the Capitol, many of them would have got shot and executed right there on the spot. They wouldn't even made it to a judge or a jury to make a decision.
Yeah, it would have been an extrajudicial killing like what happened to Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, that you mentioned. No question about it.
Right. But again, if you're getting into this, you got to know what you're signing up for. And it seems to me as though they wanted to play like a militia but they weren't prepared to actually deal with historically what a real militia has to deal with when they're trying to achieve an agenda. And now they know what it feels like from a smaller perspective, what injustice feels like in terms of how black people have historically been treated in this country. They got a small taste of what that feels like. And the European to me has always been, most of them have always been very cowardice, just in how, they implement warfare, how they attack people, how they kill innocent people. When it comes to, a look at somebody in the eyes and going head on at that person, that is not a strength of them. So when we look at people like Pizzolo and Biggs, or Pizzola and Biggs and Terrio and all of these guys, or even the Peyton Gendrons who cried in court, um, they don't possess the strength that they talk about and try to make people believe that they have. If you're going to sign up to do it, then you might as well go down like a Dylan Roof and just don't succumb to any remorse.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, it's they are rallying around, one person to try to prevent the transfer of the office of the presidency, from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. And if they're, I'm not, you know, I haven't voted for a corrupt two-party system presidential candidate since 1980, and there are no conditions under which I would ever vote for a corrupt two-party system presidential candidate. But for those people, like Terrio and these guys who are into that and have placed all of their hopes, on having one person, reelected or whatever. Um, in my opinion, it was a very foolish strategy. But at the same time, they were urged on by a guy who told them to march, on the Capitol to prevent the transfer of the presidency, and that he would be there, with them when they marched, and they believed him, and they went down there, never perhaps expecting, that things would turn out the way they would, but you know, we would never do anything like that. Not at the height of the Black Liberation Movement. I mean, we would know what to expect. I mean, because we know what happened when we weren't expecting things. So it would be a suicide mission. So they took advantage of their white privilege and didn't get shot, except for the one lady who was trying to break through the door, and a black Capitol policeman killed her. She was breaking the glass, but it would have been a mass slaughter, if it had been us. So we would have known not to do something like that. I mean, if you if that's your objective, is to bring about an overthrow of the government, then that was an ill-conceived, really basically an emotional, type of response. And so the fact that despite the fact that they some of them are military veterans, and I'm not doubting whatever they did in combat. I mean, you look at the history of the wars this country has been in, and I mean, you gotta, there've been a lot of courageous people, right, fighting the Japanese on the islands of the Pacific, and trench warfare during World War One. I think the way that they chose to fight during the American War for Independence And even during the Civil War, lining up and shooting at one another, that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But at the same time, we didn't have an adequate defense on the African continent, even though we had terrain and everything else. We just weren't organized into a nation state that had a military that was capable of defending ourselves. So I'm sure they're surprised, but at the same time, they have a possible way out. Whereas, just like Chip Fitzgerald suffering a terminal illness, is handcuffed to a hospital bed where he died. These guys will be released for prison, assuming they live. They will be released for prison. And if Trump is reelected, they will be released from prison almost immediately.